My name is Laura. I'm 36 years old, and 3 months ago I signed divorce papers that gave my husband absolutely everything. The house, the cars, the company he always bragged about. Every property in his portfolio. My lawyer looked at me like I had lost my mind. My husband, Daniel, could barely hide his excitement. His girlfriend was sitting in the back of the courtroom smiling like she had just won the lottery. And Daniel? He actually whispered, "I knew you'd come to your senses." But what none of them understood in that moment was that I hadn't lost anything. Because when Daniel signed those papers, he also signed for every dollar of the $6 million in debt attached to those assets. And he didn't realize it until it was too late. But to understand how we got there, you have to go back 4 years. Back to the night I accidentally saw something on Daniel's laptop that he never meant for me to see. When Daniel and I got married 12 years ago, he was charming in that confident, ambitious way that makes people believe he's destined for something big. He worked in commercial real estate. At least that's what everyone thought. Over the years, he built what looked like an impressive business. He talked about deals, investors, and expansion. We bought a beautiful 2-story house outside Dallas. White brick, big backyard, quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where people assume your life must be perfect. But Daniel handled all the finances. That was something he insisted on from the very beginning. "You hate dealing with money," he used to say with a laugh. "Let me take care of that." And for years I believed him. I worked as a nurse at a pediatric clinic, so I wasn't paying attention to property taxes or business loans. Daniel drove a black Mercedes. We took vacations in Mexico. He wore expensive watches and talked about how one day we'd retire before 50. From the outside, it looked like we were doing incredibly well. But the truth was, none of it was real. The first crack appeared on a random Tuesday night. Daniel had left his laptop open on the kitchen table. He was in the shower upstairs. I wasn't snooping. I was just trying to order groceries when an email notification popped up. The subject line caught my attention immediately. Final notice, account in default. At first I assumed it was spam, but the sender was a bank, and the amount listed in the preview made my stomach drop. $782,000. I clicked it. I probably shouldn't have, but something in my gut told me to look. The email wasn't addressed to Daniel. It said, Daniel Carter and Laura Carter. My name. Attached to a commercial loan I had never heard of. My heart started racing. I opened another email in the inbox, then another, and another. Within 10 minutes, I realized something that completely changed the way I saw my marriage. Daniel's empire was drowning in debt. Property loans, private lenders, credit lines, some of them months behind on payments, others already in collections. By the time Daniel came downstairs, I had quietly closed the laptop and gone to bed. I didn't confront him. Not that night. Instead, I laid there in the dark staring at the ceiling while a single thought kept repeating in my head. How much of this debt has my name on it? The answer, I would later discover, was terrifying. But it was also the moment I stopped being the trusting wife Daniel thought I was, and started becoming something he never expected. Careful, quiet, and very patient. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. Instead, I kept replaying those numbers in my head. 782,000. And that was only one loan. By morning, I had already decided 2 things. First, I wasn't going to confront Daniel, not yet. Second, I needed to find out exactly what was happening before he realized I knew. So the next day, while he was at work, I did something I had never done in our entire marriage. I logged into our joint credit report. What I saw made my hands start shaking. There weren't just 1 or 2 loans. There were dozens. Commercial mortgages, private investment loans, lines of credit from banks I'd never even heard of. Some of them were in Daniel's name, but several were in both of ours. My name had been attached to at least 4 separate properties I had never seen, properties I had never agreed to buy, and one loan application even had my electronic signature on it. A signature I had never signed. That was the moment I understood something that terrified me more than the debt itself. Daniel had me legally. If those properties collapsed, I could be responsible for half of it, or more. I sat there at the kitchen table staring at the screen for a long time. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of panicking, I started thinking like a nurse in an emergency room. When a patient comes in bleeding, you don't scream. You stabilize. You assess. You act. So that's exactly what I did. I started collecting information, quietly. Over the next few months, I became very good at pretending everything was normal. Daniel had no idea anything had changed. He still left for work every morning wearing his expensive suits. Still talked about big deals and investor meetings. Still bragged to friends about how his company was expanding. Meanwhile, I started building a private file. Every time I had access to his laptop, I photographed documents, loan agreements, property records, emails from lenders, late payment notices, collection warnings. One night I even found a spreadsheet that made my stomach turn. Daniel's total liabilities were listed in one column. When I added everything together, the number came out to just over $6 million. $6 million. And most of the properties securing those loans were already losing money. The entire thing was basically a house of cards. If even one major lender demanded payment, the whole structure would collapse, and because my name appeared on several of those documents, I could collapse with it. But there was something else. Something I hadn't expected. About a year after I discovered the debt, Daniel started coming home later than usual. At first, I assumed it was stress. The business obviously wasn't doing well, but then small details started to add up. He bought new clothes, more expensive ones, started wearing a different cologne. He began going to the gym every morning before work. Then one night he left his phone on the kitchen counter while he took a call outside. The screen lit up. A message preview appeared. "I can't wait to see you tonight," followed by a heart emoji. The contact name said Emily. My chest tightened. But strangely, I didn't feel shocked. By then, I already knew Daniel was living inside a fantasy version of his life. Of course, there was another woman. People like Daniel always find someone who believes their story. I didn't open the message. I didn't confront him. Instead, I added one more folder to my growing collection of evidence. Because if this marriage ended, I wanted to be ready. And deep down, I knew that day was coming. It came faster than I expected. About 8 months later, Daniel walked into the kitchen one evening and sat down across from me like he was about to announce a business deal. "I think we should get divorced." Just like that. No emotion. No hesitation. I looked at him calmly. "Why?" He leaned back in his chair. "I've outgrown this marriage." That was the exact phrase he used. As if our 12 years together were some kind of starter apartment he had upgraded from. Then he added something that told me everything I needed to know. "I've already spoken to a lawyer." Of course he had. Daniel always liked to be 5 steps ahead. At least he thought he was. "I want the house," he continued. "The cars, the company, the investment properties." He listed them like items on a grocery list. Then he shrugged. "You can keep your job and your retirement account." I stared at him for a moment. Inside my head, a single thought formed. You have absolutely no idea what you're asking for. But on the outside, I just nodded slowly. "If that's what you want," I said quietly. Daniel smiled. That arrogant, confident smile I had seen 1,000 times. "Good," he said. "I knew you'd be reasonable." And that was the moment my plan finally became clear. If Daniel wanted everything, then I was going to give him everything. Every property, every asset, every business account, and every single dollar of the $6 million in debt attached to them. All he had to do was sign the papers. At first, Daniel assumed the divorce would be quick. He already had a lawyer. He already had a plan. And most importantly, he believed I was too naive to fight him. Within a week, his attorneys sent over the first draft of the divorce agreement. It was exactly what Daniel had described. He would receive the house, the Mercedes, his company, all of the investment properties. In exchange, I would keep my personal savings and my job. No alimony, no claim on the business, nothing. When I read the document, I actually smiled. Because Daniel had just handed me the perfect opportunity. The next step was finding the right lawyer. Not someone loud or aggressive. Someone careful. Someone who understood financial documents. That's how I met Patricia Miller. She was in her early 50s, calm, analytical, the kind of person who reads every line of a contract twice. I brought her a folder containing 3 years of evidence, loan documents, debt statements, property records, emails from lenders. She spent nearly an hour silently reviewing everything. Finally, she looked up at me and said something I'll never forget. Your husband isn't wealthy. I nodded. I know. She tapped the papers. He's insolvent. If the banks move at the wrong moment, this entire structure collapses. I know that too. Patricia leaned back in her chair. So tell me what you want. I didn't hesitate. I want him to get exactly what he asked for. For a second, she studied my face. Then slowly she smiled. All right, she said. Let's give it to him. The new agreement looked almost identical to the one Daniel's lawyer had prepared. Same assets, same division, same outcome. But there was one critical difference. Buried deep in the document was something called a liability assumption clause. It stated that the party receiving an asset would also assume full responsibility for any debt attached to that asset. In other words, if Daniel took the properties, he also took the loans. All of them. Every mortgage, every private lender, every unpaid balance. The total amount? Just over $6 million. And because he insisted on owning everything, every dollar of that debt would become his alone. 2 weeks later, we were sitting in a small courtroom finalizing the divorce. Daniel looked relaxed, almost. His lawyer seemed confident. Daniel's girlfriend was sitting in the gallery seats behind him. A woman in her 20s with perfect makeup and a designer handbag. She gave me a small smile when I walked in, like she was watching the final act of a movie where the villain finally wins. Daniel leaned toward me before the hearing started. I'm glad you decided not to make this messy, he said. I told you this was the smart decision. I didn't respond. The judge began reviewing the agreement, page after page, asset transfers, property rights, vehicle ownership, everything Daniel wanted. Finally, she looked up. Mr. Carter, you understand that by signing this agreement you assume full ownership of the listed assets? Yes, Your Honor, Daniel said confidently. And you waive your right to independent financial review? Yes. His lawyer shifted slightly in his seat, but Daniel didn't notice. He was too busy imagining his new life. The judge nodded. Very well, you may sign. Daniel didn't read the document again. He just grabbed the pen and signed the last page. Then he leaned back in his chair with a satisfied smile. It took less than a minute for everything to fall apart. His lawyer flipped through the pages one last time, and suddenly froze. Daniel, he said quietly. What? You assumed liability for the debts. Daniel frowned. What debts? His lawyer turned the document toward him and pointed to the clause. Daniel read it. Once. Then again. I watched the exact moment his brain caught up with the words on the page. His face went pale. You're responsible for all attached financial obligations, his lawyer said slowly. All $6 million. Daniel's head snapped toward me. You knew about this? I met his eyes calmly. You asked for everything, I said. His girlfriend stood up from the gallery. $6 million? What does that mean? Daniel didn't answer. Because he already knew. He had just signed for every failing property, every unpaid loan, every financial mistake he had been hiding for years. The judge closed the file. The agreement is legally binding, she said. Court is adjourned. 3 months later, the first foreclosure notice arrived. Then another. The bank started calling. The company filed for bankruptcy. The Mercedes was repossessed. Daniel eventually had to sell the house to cover part of the debt. Even that wasn't enough. I heard through mutual friends that his girlfriend left shortly after the court hearing. Apparently, she wasn't interested in dating a man who owed $6 million. As for me, I moved into a small townhouse closer to the hospital where I work. It's not a mansion, but it's peaceful. And every night when I lock the door, I know something Daniel never understood. Freedom isn't about how much you own. Sometimes, freedom is about knowing exactly what to let go of. And what to leave behind.